Today, on Fertility and Wholeness with Diana, I'm thrilled to welcome a woman whose approach to health feels like a deep exhale in a world that is constantly pushing us to do more, hustle harder, and ignore the body signals. Diana Rave is a certified health and wellness coach, a cell biologist with over a decade of experience, and a mama of three. What makes her work so compelling is how she brings together science, strategy, and somatic wisdom, starting at a cellular level. She helps women calm their biology, lower stress hormones, and restore health by focusing on mineral balance, strategic nutrition, and lifestyle practices that actually work with the body's rhythms. Her philosophy is simple but revolutionary. When the stress goes down, everything becomes easier. Weight shifts, energy returns, the body responds. And often, it's not about doing more, but doing the right kind of less, with intention and deep respect for how woman's body truly function. Whether you're navigating hormonal imbalances, stubborn weight, burned out, or chronic stress, Diana's approach offers hope and grounded solutions. Welcome to Fertility and Wholeness Podcast. Are you tired of seeing that test be negative month after month? Will you ever stop having to take test after test? Are you scared of all the medical terminology, office visits, and misinformation you see at every turn on your infertility journey? If you answer yes to any of those, you're not alone. You are at the right place. I'm so happy you're here with us. My name is Ariana. I'm a fertility care practitioner and a wholeness coach with over a decade of experience on the field. I created this podcast because I know what it is to feel alone and lost while navigating fertility problems. And after helping hundreds of women, teaching them how to not protract their cycles, boost their fertility, and navigate their monthly emotional roller coaster and get pregnant naturally, I am on a mission to empower women to take charge of their fertility journey. In this podcast, you will find heartfelt conversations, education, tips on how to take care of and understand your fertility, emotional support, simple lifestyle changes to boost your fertility, nutrition, self-care routines, tips for handling stress and anxiety with ease. We have amazing, exciting expert interviews and guests, inspirational stories, and practical advice on preparing for pregnancy and joyful delivery. Are you ready to reclaim your health, your life, and become pregnant naturally? If so, grab your green juice and prenatal vitamins. This episode is just what the doctor ordered. Welcome, Diana. Please introduce yourself. We have a huge topic to cover today: how stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline disrupt and drive weight gain and hormonal imbalances.
Yes, Ariana, thank you for having me on the podcast. So this is such an interesting topic, and in my health coaching with my clients, no matter what health goals they have, I always start with stress. Because when we manage stress, especially at a cellular level, everything else related to health gets easier and more achievable. That is where I start with my health coaching clients. And it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I am a cellular biologist and I just love cells and I love learning about them, teaching about them. There's something that I want to start by saying that with the topic of stress, stress is not just a mental state. It's a full body endocrine system response. And so that's important to know because the hormonal cascade that's triggered by stress affects everything from your metabolism to your sleep to your fertility. And most people don't realize that the two primary stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, are actually made from the same gland, but in different parts of the gland, but they're always released together. And so a lot of people confuse adrenaline for cortisol, but they're separate, but they're released at the same time. So let's get into what these stress hormones are. So adrenaline is your body's fast-acting hormone. So it floods your system when you're scared, anxious, overworked, physically threatened, but it's also released with other habits that many of us partake in, which is drinking caffeine, eating sugar, skipping meals, and intense exercise. And then I have a bonus one for the audience. Smelling artificial fragrances and perfumes also releases adrenaline. And so, how does this release of adrenaline tie into insulin and storage of fat? Well, adrenaline tells your liver to release stored glucose, which is also called glycogen. And so your liver releases all this glucose into your bloodstream in order for you to have the fuel to act in an emergency situation. I mean, even if we're just sitting here having stressful thoughts or maybe drinking some coffee, we're still having that release of sugar into the bloodstream. And so that then triggers insulin to be released, which then triggers fat storage. But before we dive into all that, let's talk about cortisol, which is like the other hormone that gets released at the same time. And it has a different job than adrenaline. Cortisol reduces inflammation and it dampens the pain signals so you can keep functioning in a crisis. Like that's why sometimes you've heard of people that if they're in a car accident and they fracture their ankle, they can still walk around to get to safety, but after the pain starts coming in, after, the emergency is over. And that's what cortisol is doing. And so the problem is that when you're exposed to all these chronic stressors, like the ones we just talked about, and also including mental stress, negative thought loops, overworking, intense workouts, synthetic fragrances, and chemicals, all of this keeps you in a chronic adrenalized state. And that is when your cells start to suffer.
This is so interesting. But now that you're talking about that, a lot of women get tested for stress hormones and the cortisol is not as bad. But now that you're talking about how maybe they're not looking into adrenaline, it's so
Yes, and that's something that a lot of women don't realize, that when you trigger adrenaline, cortisol is also released. They're from the same gland, from the adrenal gland. So the adrenaline is released from the middle part, it's called the medulla, and the cortisol is released from the outer part called the cortex. So that those two hormones like work together to help you survive an emergency situation.
So, one of the things that I come across a lot, and myself included, is adrenal fatigue. We get the diagnosis adrenal fatigue. You have adrenal fatigue, that's why your progesterone is not working. You have high estrogen, testosterone, all these labels, but they're like, why do I have adrenal fatigue? We don't know, right? So, can you go a little bit into that?
Yes. So adrenal fatigue essentially is when your adrenal glands do not produce the sufficient hormones that you need. So, adrenaline and cortisol are not bad when they're at the proper levels because we need them in order to mobilize energy, in order to reduce inflammation, to get going. Like when you have something to do, you need a little bit of adrenaline, the proper amount to get going. But if you're constantly overstimulating your adrenals with coffee, with sugar, with fragrances, with overworking, with intense workouts, with stressful thoughts, it's like I call them the whips to the adrenal. So whip, whip, whip. You're whipping your adrenals all day long, and it's like a horse. Finally, they say, no more. I am done. And so that's adrenal fatigue.
This is such a helpful analogy because when somebody's like, "Oh, I've been diagnosed with adrenal fatigue," I don't know what that is. You're really exhausting your adrenals. The adrenal response that you should have is no longer there. So you're not really gonna benefit because a lot of them want to benefit from hormones like progesterone or even taking supplements. I'm like, yeah, we really need to restore function first. When you mention exercise, one of the things that I tell my clients, especially if they're doing heavy stuff, I'm like, I know exercise is thought as good, but this type of exercise is not recommended when you're trying to get pregnant because it's stressing your body. So, what would you say are one of the latest trends that you would not recommend to somebody that is already has adrenal fatigue or already has high cortisol?
So I would not recommend any intense exercise that gives you adrenaline. So with clients with adrenal fatigue or people who are maybe have a trauma background and they're trying to recover their adrenals, I say walking and like restorative yoga is really or stretching, like any restorative movement is really what they should be doing because any other type of exercise is going to release adrenaline. And that's what we're trying to avoid. is just going to add to the adrenal fatigue. And so some of my clients will say, "Oh, but I feel so good after I do intense exercise." But then I ask them, "But how do you feel like half an hour or an hour later?" And they say they don't, the pain comes back. They start feeling like flu like symptoms. And that's a sign that you've overexhausted your adrenals. Now, it's not to say that you're never going to exercise again. Once you're restored, once your hormones are back in balance, yeah, you're going to be able to do your exercise because you're going to be able to fully recover from it.
Thank you, because like I say, sometimes I'm like, less is more. So how other everyday habits, I know you talk a little bit about fragrances, how those stimulate adrenaline or cortisol?
Yes, so synthetic fragrances, anything that is not natural, the body is going to have a fight or flight response to it. So, a synthetic fragrance, when you smell it, your body is like high alert. And what is the high alert fight or flight hormone? Adrenaline. And so, your adrenals have to pump out adrenaline. And imagine being bathed in this all day. You're going to exhaust your adrenals. And by you're not even stressed. It's the environment that's stressing you out. Or, caffeine can do the same thing. Caffeine is another adrenal whip. You're whipping your adrenal, like, give me adrenaline, give me adrenaline. And so if you use that too much, you're also going to exhaust your adrenals.
Because you use the term too much. How much is too much? As a coffee lover, I want to know.
Well, it all depends on the state of your adrenals. Like, there's some people that can enjoy coffee once in a while and they'll recover fine. Their adrenals are healthy. Their adrenals can make those hormones for them. But people who are in adrenal fatigue, they really shouldn't be drinking coffee. Unfortunately, I know people get so mad at me when I say that. Sorry to be the bearer of
Well,
bad news.
well, two big things, right? We're surrounded by perfumes and artificial fragrances, from like dryer sheet to anything we put on our face or hair. So when I mentioned toss the toxins, a lot of women have a response, and so I feel like more education needs to be done. What would you say in 3 minutes? This is why you want to, beyond that, is there any other side effects?
Well, I mean, yes. So you're going to stimulate your adrenal response. So that's not going to help any of your hormones. Remember, we talked about stress is not just in your mind or like circumstantial. Stress is biological. And it's a hormone cascade. When you stimulate one hormone, you're going to stimulate all of them. So if you're trying to balance your hormones, you're adding to the load and it's not helping. But also, your liver has to detox all of these synthetic fragrances, all of these toxins. And so you're adding to the load. And how this ties into hormones, your liver is actually the one that's detoxing you from the hormones too. From excess hormones, your liver is working to do that. And it's doing that, packaging them up, packaging the hormones up, and it's putting them into the bile to send them into your digestive tract and hopefully out the toilet. And so if your liver is burdened with too many toxins, it's going to not be able to do its job.
Wow. So how all this ties to insulin and weight gain? Because the next thing is like a lot of women with polycystic ovaries or other hormonal issues also have insulin resistance. I don't know why I have insulin resistance. Well, first they're diagnosed with polycystic ovaries, and they're like, well, I have polycystic ovaries, and I don't know, like they want to give me the birth control pill. I have taken it, and it's not really solving anything. So I don't know if you have anything to say on that. The silver lining of that is insulin resistance. So, do you have anything that you could share with us?
Yes, so let's start by understanding what happens when you trigger adrenaline. So, every time you trigger adrenaline, your blood sugar spikes. Why? Because adrenaline is a fight or flight hormone. And so it's going to prepare your body to get ready to fight, get ready to run, get ready to, save your life. And so what do we need? We need energy, we need sugar. So the adrenaline tells the liver, release all your stored glucose. The liver is always ready with some stored glucose in there for emergencies. So it tells the liver, release the sugar now. And so here comes this flood of sugar into your bloodstream. And what does your body do? If that sugar is not used to actually run from a bear or to get in a fight or to do something physical, blood sugar is too high. So this is when the body needs to release insulin. And so the bigger the spike of sugar, the bigger the spike of insulin. And so that insulin is designed to move the excess sugar out of the bloodstream to keep you safe, because you don't want your sugar either too high or too low. Both of those states are an emergency. So if, like I said, if you're not using that sugar to run from a predator, the insulin stores it as triglycerides or as fat. And so that's how, this cycle can happen with adrenaline, blood glucose, insulin, fat storage. Even if you're not eating sugar, it's like you're snacking on sugar all day. So that's why people say, well, I'm eating healthy. Why am I still struggling with weight or inflammation or hormonal imbalances? It's because of this stress loop that we're talking about.
So you talk a little bit about the biology of stress, but there's also mental stress because we do live in a fast-paced world, especially if you live in the US. There is so much going on. If you are working women, you get up in the morning, you have a to-do list. We haven't even started our to-do list and we're already worried that we're not going to finish it. And so there's so much going on in our heads. So there are two elements to it, the biological stress and the mental stress. Can you tell us a little bit about how mental stress, because that's one of the things that I do advocate a lot and I help my clients with. And like you're saying, they're like, oh yeah, I'm eating well. I don't really think I have a lot of stress. My job is not that bad. I have an amazing husband. But I also say, there's also trauma that you have not processed. And even though you're not necessarily at the trauma place, your body still has not processed the trauma. So every time you think of that, it kind of like brings back the response.
It's not even every time you think, it's every time that something in the environment triggers you to remember. And you might not even remember, your body remembers. And so your body is triggered by something. It could be a scent, a sight, a sound, something that triggers unprocessed trauma. What happens? Adrenaline is released because it's a trigger for fight or flight. It's a trigger for I'm not safe. Your body says, I'm not safe. Something's bad's going to happen. Trigger adrenaline so that I could save myself from the situation. And so that is how unprocessed trauma or even stressful thoughts can keep you in adrenal fatigue, because we think that thoughts are just like elusive, but they actually translate to biochemistry. Your body translates your thoughts into biochemistry, adrenaline, cortisol.
Because I've been talking a lot about egg health, the mitochondrial energy that it needs the egg to develop and to be a good a good egg, which is so important for anybody, whether they're 20, 30, even if you're older and you're trying to conceive, how all this affects our egg health or anything in the fertility process.
So, like I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, stress is a hormonal cascade. So it's almost like stress or trauma should be reassigned as an endocrine disorder, really, because it affects all the hormones, including the sex hormones, the hormones that you need in order to have fertility. So, yeah, that's how stress does that. It's not just like a standalone hormone. It works in concert with all the other hormones, the system, the endocrine system.
So, one of the things that I tell my clients is that even though we're trying to heal the reproductive system, because that's the organ they think is malfunctioning, that system is not one organ, it's an entire ecosystem. But that one is linked to the nervous system, the digestive system, the respiratory system, because also if our breathing is constricted, we're stressing, right? So when I talk about restoring health, my aim is always to look at the entire person, not just an organ that is not functioning. And a lot of the women feel like, yeah, but I don't care about my liver. What I really want is to ovulate. So, can you talk a little bit about more how all this ecosystem is working together? It's not just an organ that needs to be fixed, but more an entire ecosystem.
Yes. Okay. So when I have somebody with a particular goal or a particular thing that they want to work on, like you said, I want to work on this system and not worry about the other systems. I always say, wait, back up. We have to start with reducing stress hormones, because stress hormones lead to a cascade, like a downward cascade of all the other hormones. So if you reduce cellular stress, everything else becomes easier. your body has two modes. It has your fight or flight mode or your healing mode or repair mode. And if you're in your fight or flight mode, you're not going to be healing. And so the first step I take with clients is to reduce their cellular stress by, all the habits that we're talking about and that we'll talk about a little bit later. And once your stress hormones come down, it's a cascade effect for your other systems. And so, like, let's take, for example, the liver. What does the liver have anything to do with stress hormones? Well, the liver is the organ that clears the excess hormones from your body. So it has a lot to do with it. So when we think about what does liver health have to do with fertility, it clears excess hormones, and fertility can be a hormonal problem. And so that's what it has. All the systems work together to clear things, to absorb nutrients. It's not just one organ working by itself.
Because you have given us a lot of education, and I just want our listener to feel like this is the things that I can do now, or I can put in my list to, we don't want to stress them either, just to get started.
Yes. So, one of the most overlooked parts of all of this is that, like we said, people think stress is emotional or circumstantial, like, oh, it's because I had a hard day at work or a hard day with the kids. But in reality, it's some of our habits that are, kind of societal habits that are keeping us in a constant state of adrenal stimulation, which, let's go back over that loop again, which means more adrenaline, more cortisol, more insulin, and ultimately more fat storage. So let's start with caffeine. So whether it's from coffee, pre-workout supplements, energy drinks, green tea, caffeine directly stimulates the adrenal glands. So it's a whip for your adrenals. And yes, you feel energized in the long term, but you're actually pushing your body to release both adrenaline and cortisol, even if you're just sitting still, like there's no emergency. And remember, when that adrenaline goes up, it tells your liver to dump the stored sugar, which then raises your insulin. And if you're not using that sugar, it's going to go get stored as fat. And another one of the habits in our society, it's sugar, right? And sometimes sugar and caffeine go hand in hand. So sugar does the same thing, but what it does is it directly spikes the blood sugar. So here comes insulin to bring it down. But because you spiked it so fast, the insulin also came in hard and fast, and it brings the sugar lower than when you started. So you're now low blood sugar, and that's an emergency for your body. That's a dangerous state. So what does your body do? Your body panics, and it releases adrenaline to bring it back up. And so now you're back in that loop that we talked about. Let's see, another one that I have, my clients look into and people are surprised is the synthetic fragrances and perfumes. And so we're talking anything that can be in candles, body wash, laundry detergent, air fresheners. They stimulate your adrenals to release adrenaline. And so one of the biggest tips there is to go fragrance free. Go fragrance free with the things you use most, which is laundry detergent, dishwashing soap, and shampoo and things like that. Go fragrance free. And nowadays, it's so easy to get fragrance free things. Like, people are catching on, and the companies are catching on. They're making practically of every of the things I mentioned, they're making fragrance free versions. And so I would tell people, just start switching up and go to fragrance free. It's not that hard. It's very accessible. And the last one that we were talking about is intense exercise. And I think we already went through this, but it releases adrenaline and cortisol. And yes, that's why it feels good in the moment while you're doing it, because the cortisol is reducing the pain, but it's another whip to your adrenals. And if you're in adrenal fatigue, you should really be just walking or doing yoga. And once you realize the ripple effect of all these little everyday stressors, and you realize that you're not gaining weight or you're not like tired or sick because of willpower or bad luck, but it's just your hormones are doing exactly what they were trained to do in survival mode. But once you bring the stressors down and your cells feel like they're safe, you go back to healing mode. And that's why this topic is so important, because in healing mode, everything else gets easier.
Right now, we're talking about women, but a lot of men are also having testosterone issues, hormonal issues. And like you're saying, we're getting our energy drink and we think everything is fine. But what really are is disrupting the entire system. So would you say it's the same protocol for men and women?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I would say it's the same. That yeah, their hormones are different, testosterone instead of estrogen, but absolutely their system, they still have the liver, they still have the adrenal glands, they have everything, and it's also stimulating their adrenal glands, all the things that we talked about. Absolutely. So many health problems that at the root of it is stress. And so if we can work on stress, we can help so many problems. And yeah, that's what I love to specialize in. And as a cell biologist, it's just what I just believe it to be true that, and it's scientifically proven that once you lower your stress levels, other health habits become easier. Like eating healthy becomes easier, working out becomes easier once that baseline is down and you're not in this adrenalized state.
When you talk about cellular stress, is that what you mean? We're stressing or the cascade, or is it any other explanation that you have for cellular stress?
Yeah, cellular stress is just that. It's the stress that's caused to your cells from the adrenal cascade and from starting from those stressors that cause the adrenal cascade.
Anything that you would like our listeners to have? Did you say I will die in this hill for this? What would that be?
Well, if we could just talk a little bit about, there we named so many things. And so, yeah, we don't want people to get stressed out and like, where do I start? If I had to pick just one place to start, it would be to create safety, the feeling of safety in your cells with food. So, from a biochemical perspective, stabilizing your blood sugar is the fastest way to calm the stress response. It's the fastest way to tell your body you are safe. You don't have to, release that adrenaline every time the sugar gets too high or every time the sugar gets too low. So stabilizing it. And how do we do this? By eating regularly, not skipping meals, focusing on protein, vegetables, and beans. So, beans are an incredible source of something called soluble fiber, and this is going to help escort these stress hormones out of the body via the digestive system. And so, this is something that I work with. I teach my clients the bean protocol, which was developed by nutritionist Karen Hurd. And so the bean protocol is wonderful. And if there was one thing I would like to leave your listeners with is, to get curious about this bean protocol. It doesn't spike your blood sugar. It supports your liver and it calms down your system so you can get into healing mode. And also when you remove the stressors that we talked about, caffeine, sugar, fragrances, and you combine that with nourishing food, your cells stop screaming for help. You move out of survival mode and you stop storing everything as fat. And then you are now in repair, rebuilding mode.
That sounds like something that I want to look into it. Most of our listeners are in a time crunch. Obviously, mental stress, but they're like, I want to see results. I want to see them faster. Obviously, these are lifestyle changes that take a little bit for your body to catch on. Like now, can go into healing mode. How long does it take to get to healing mode once you implement all these things?
Ooh, well, different cells have different life cycles or what they're called mitoses, like where the cell replicates. So let's just talk about the adrenals. Adrenals have a 3-month life cycle. So every 3 months, you get some new, fresh adrenal cells. And so when the clients go on a certain protocol or a certain lifestyle change, diet change that affects the adrenals, they will see improvement, like major improvements at the 3-month mark, at the 6-month mark, at the 9-month mark, every 3 months where you have that turnover of adrenal cells. So that's what's expected. But I mean, other cells have like days, they just are 3 days turnover. But when we're specifically talking about the adrenals, it's 3 months. So you got to have patience.
Also, we talk about nutrition and not skipping meals. What is your take on fasting?
So, fasting is controversial with people with adrenal fatigue because fasting will release adrenaline because your body needs the blood sugar. If you're not eating it, it's got to make it. How does it make it? Through gluconeogenesis, which is what's the trigger for that? Adrenaline. So your body has to release adrenaline to release some blood sugar. So people that are in adrenal fatigue really shouldn't be fasting.
What would you say would be the book that you should read to get more informed?
I do have some podcast recommendations. Any podcast with Karen Hurd from the Beam Protocol, I would highly recommend for people. She doesn't have a podcast, but she's a guest on many podcasts. And so that would be my recommendation. And at the top of my head for book recommendations. Okay, so yes, I have one. The book, it's called Breath by Nestor James, is a wonderful book on breathing. And you think, well, people know how to breathe. My goodness, read this book and your mind will be blown. And it has to do with the stress response. So it ties right in.
Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to include in this episode was the block therapy. Can you give us a little bit of intro? What is that and why you have found it so helpful and healing in your journey?
Yes. Okay. So since we're talking about the stress response and maybe some trauma, like past trauma. So when our body is exposed to trauma or is in a traumatic situation, your body braces itself, like it, to protect its internal organs, it braces. And if that trauma, if that energy is not released, that energy can get stored in what's called the fascia, which is a connective tissue all over your body made out of elastin and collagen. And so this fascia, it goes through every organ, every cell. It's like the connective tissue. And your fascia, if it holds on to this trauma and you're bracing, you can, start living your life from that state and never release that tension. And so block therapy is a wonderful system tool to release the tension in your fascia in order to be able to breathe more diaphragmatically, in order to reduce the stress response and to have better posture, to heal pain. If you have unexplained pain, it's a wonderful, wonderful system to do that. If there's one thing that I hope people take away from this conversation is that if you're having whatever issue you're having, your body isn't broken. It's just stuck in a survival mode. And when you start addressing stress at the cellular level, everything else starts to shift. So all the other things that add to your health, like eating well, moving, sleeping, losing weight, all of that becomes easier, more natural, and even more joyful. And so you don't have to push your way to health. You just have to teach your body that it's safe. And, how do we do that? Through lowering those stress hormones, because those stress hormones is how your body knows I'm not safe. So if we lower those stress hormones, your body can breathe and get into healing mode.
Diana, thank you for bringing such a clarity and compassion to this conversation. What you have shared today is not just science, it's a deep invitation for women to begin listening to their bodies in a new way, to stop pushing against themselves and instead create health from inside out. To all our listeners, if you've been feeling stuck, burned out, or like your body isn't responding the way that it used to, know that this isn't your fault. There is nothing broken about you. Your body may just be asking for less noise, less pressure, and more restoration. And it's the small shift that Diana invited you today. Maybe it's adding the serving of beans or simply saying no to the next cup of coffee. You don't have to do it all. You just have to do what supports you the most. And if this episode resonated with you, go follow Diana at the smallstepshealthcoach.com. And if you know a woman who needs to hear this, share it with her. Let's keep spreading truth and wholeness one conversation at a time. Until next time, be kind to your body. She's always on your side. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, we got a special treat for you. Join our free Facebook group where you can connect with other amazing women and share your thoughts. Join us by clicking in the link in the show notes. We can't wait to welcome you into our supportive community. And don't forget to come back for our next episode, where we'll be sharing even more inspiring stories, encouraging tips, educational insights, and practical strategies. Oh, and before you go, we have a tiny favor to ask. If you found today's episode uplifting and helpful, please leave us a review. It's like giving us a virtual hug, and it helps other amazing women like you find our show. Plus, it makes us smile from ear to ear. And hey, why stop there? Share the love. Tell your Betsies, your mom, your sister, and even your favorite barista about our podcast. The more, the merrier.